centred zip in the back of my cushion cover. Just remember to allow a little bit of extra fabric because you've got an extra seam in the centre here, and I've tried to match the pattern up either side as best as I can, and that's how it works. So nice long zip so I can insert the cushion pad easily, and when that's zipped together, you barely know that it was there. These are the two sides of my fabric, and this is the back of the cushion cover, and I've lined up the two edges right down the centre of the fabric where I want the zip to go. The first thing I'm going to do is to place the zip across the seam, and I'm going to mark either end where I want the zip to open to. So you could measure that and make it absolutely central, but I think that'll do for now. And I'm going to mark just inside the stopper on the bottom end of the zip and just inside the stopper on the top end of the zip, and I'm using a disappearing ink, so that'll disappear even if it shows through to the other side of the fabric. I'm not worried about that at the moment. Now the next thing I'm going to do is take it to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a normal stitch, quite a small stitch, on the end of the fabric here with my 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, or 5/8 of an inch, whatever you decide to use. And then from here to here, the opening, I'm going to sew with the longest stitch that I have on my sewing machine, and then go back on the bottom end of the seam with my smaller stitch again. So, but excuse the squeak, bring my sewing machine in. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance I'm going to choose. So all I'll do first of all is to back tack. This is on a small stitch just across the end of the fabric, and then sew straight down to the first mark. Just back tack again. Then I'm going to increase the length of my stitch to the longest stitch, which is 4.5 millimeters on this machine. Sew down to the second mark, back tack, and then change my stitch down to the smaller length again. And back tack. And move that machine out of the way. And normally I would press at this point, so have the iron ready, but because this is cotton I should be able to press that open with my fingers and get a nice crisp seam. Next thing to do is to take my zip, and I'm going to place it again over those two marks that I've just made. But I need to make sure that the coil or the teeth are lined up perfectly over the seam down the centre of my cushion cover. And I'll just pin across there, and then I'm going to tack by hand, or baste by hand, all the way around. And the reason I'm going to do that and not just sew over the pins is that when you start to sew this on the machine, you can move the pins slightly, and I really do want those teeth to stay lined up against the centre of my zip. So I'll start at the bottom because I think that's easier, and I'm just going to do a rough tack in big stitches, and I'm using a contrasting thread because I want to see clearly when I'm taking this out at the end of my project. Take my pins out as I go, and I'm just going to check all the way around that those teeth are lined up right against the seam. So I'll just tack that all the way, and then we'll pop our zipper foot on and carry on with our cushion cover. So that's my zip sewn into place with a basting stitch by hand. I've put my zipper foot onto my machine, and what I'm going to do now is sew all the way around with quite a small stitch, and I'm going to sew from the top because I think I can see what I'm doing from the top, and these are the stitches that you're going to see after all. So I'm going to line up the edge of the foot, of my zipper foot, so that it's just touching the teeth and you can feel where it goes there. I'm going to start with my needle down this time, and then just very carefully sew all the way around, keeping this line as straight as I can. I'm going to be careful when I get to this section because this is where the slider is, so I still want the stitches to stay nice and neat from the top. So I'm just going to firmly guide the fabric around so it doesn't twist. Lift the needle up, put the foot down, and sew straight across the bottom. Now if you've got nylon teeth on your zip, it doesn't matter if you sew straight across it because it's not going to damage the needle. If you're sewing in a metal zip, then I'd suggest that you really do that carefully and maybe turn the hand wheel by hand. So back down the other side. then I'll sew back across the top to meet up with my first stitch. And just back tack. And that helps to stop the stitches from coming undone. So I'll cut off my loose threads. Whoops. Take away the basting or the tacking stitches, and this is why I did them in a contrasting colour so I can see exactly where they are. And then we'll cut those stitches down the centre. Remember the central stitches when I put the seam together were longer. They're the longest that your machine will do, and that's because I'm going to unpick them in just a second. I'll take all of those out. Like so. Move the machine out of the way again. And then you'll take your quick unpick, and starting just inside where the seam was, I'm going to take those longer stitches from my machine and very gently just snip them all through with my quick unpick. Then you can either use tweezers or your fingers and just take away all of those little pieces that are left over from where you've cut them. Find your slider, and there you've got a perfect zip. When it's closed over, the two sides of the seam should meet perfectly. And then I'm ready to sew the two sides of the cushion cover together.